relations with the United States and with Japan. And it was a wonderful deal. But it fell apart because they didn't want to accept the verification. They didn't want inspectors to go in to their country. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try again. I think we should keep trying. But I know that in many parts of the world there's a sense that America is to blame. America is the large power. The large power should be the one to make the concessions. But it does take somebody on the other side willing to make deals and to honor the deals. And so many times I have seen North Korea violating the deal. In 1997, they violated the 1994 deal. In 2006, they tested a nuclear weapon in violation of the 2005 agreement. In 2008, they refused to accept the verification of the... And in 2012, the Leap Day deal lasted 3 weeks. So I'm not very optimistic about the willingness of North Korea to accept legitimate, sincere negotiations. I think we should keep trying. We can't give up. The problem is getting too bad. And sanctions alone won't do it, but sanctions maybe could help.
Gracias, profesor. 3 preguntas, por favor. 2.
Isabel Hernández, de Estudios Económicos de la Comisión Federal de Electricidad. Y mi pregunta más que nada es, gracias al acuerdo del 2015 entre Irán y Estados Unidos cuando firmaron el famoso acuerdo, de ahí en fuera los precios del petróleo ya estaban muy caídos. Y ahora, ¿qué perspectivas hay de que Irán siga con la producción, seguirá igual con su producción de petróleo, aumentará o cómo será la negociación? ¿Cuál es su perspectiva en cuanto al mercado energético? Y bueno, dado que el mercado energético arrastra todas las demás commodities, pues bueno, eso es lo que tenemos. Gracias.
La siguiente, por favor.
Buenas tardes.
Hola. Buenas tardes, Carlos Rodríguez de Casa de la pregunta es, ¿cuáles serían los impactos en la seguridad de la región, China, Japón, Rusia, respecto a este comportamiento, digamos, de Corea del Norte? Y otra pregunta en este mismo sentido es, desde el enfoque de no proliferación de armas nucleares, ¿cuáles serían otros temas a los cuales habría que poner especial atención? Estoy pensando justo en el Medio Oriente, la posibilidad real si Arabia Saudita tiene o no capacidad de desarrollar armas nucleares y cómo esto desestabilizaría, o algún otro estado que esté, digamos, en la agenda de los temas de no proliferación.
Una tercera, por favor,
Muy buenas tardes. Abril García, de Ciencias Políticas. A mí me preocupa mucho el problema de la migración, sobre todo en estos países que pues ha venido proliferando a través de la guerra. ¿Qué se va a hacer al respecto con ellos? Puesto que en Bélgica ya están manifestando movimientos sociales que no quieren a los sirios, que no quieren a los árabes, puesto que ellos buscan un refugio y desafortunadamente no se tiene. ¿Qué va a pasar con esta gente? ¿Qué hace Estados Unidos para poder apoyar o tener algunas negociaciones en otros países de Europa para poder dar ese apoyo? Gracias.
Mr. Mendes, you asked about the impact of the Iran deal and oil prices. I forgot to mention that when I was talking about sanctions having an impact on the Iranian economy, actually the fall of the oil price had a much bigger impact on the economy, bigger than the sanctions. But the sanctions multiplied the impact, and that's one reason Iran wanted to come back to the negotiating table. Iran is determined to increase the oil production and sales to resume the production rate before the sanctions began to hit hard in 2012. Some of their fields cannot resume the production because over time they lost some capacity. But it's interesting that Iran's increased oil production probably hasn't had that much impact on the oil prices. I think there are other reasons that that oil prices have remained low. Iran thinks that the Saudis are purposely keeping oil prices low in order to pressure Iran and in order to punish Iran. I think the Saudis have other reasons for this. The Saudis are trying to drive American shale oil producers out of the market, and the impact is being felt by Iran. Carlos Rodriguez, you asked a couple of questions. The Chinese are very worried about North Korea's how other nations in the region are responding to North Korea. South Korea agreed with the United States to introduce the Theater High Altitude Ballistic Missile THAAD system, and the Chinese are worried that this would give the United States an ability to have radar coverage of Chinese ballistic missiles and could undermine China's security. This is why China has agreed to stricter sanctions. The Middle East case, there's concern that Saudi Arabia would want the same capabilities that Iran has. In fact, the Saudis have made very clear that if Iran gets nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia will get nuclear weapons. If Iran is allowed uranium enrichment, the Saudis want uranium enrichment. I don't think it's so easy for Saudi Arabia to get uranium enrichment, because the 45 countries that are participating in the nuclear suppliers group are prohibited under their rules from supplying such technology to a state that wants to use it for potential weapons purposes. So this leaves other states that are outside the nuclear suppliers group, Israel, India, Pakistan, North Korea. Israel is not going to supply it. I don't think India is going to supply it. India doesn't want to help an Arab state. Pakistan is the usual answer, because Saudi Arabia helped to finance Pakistan's nuclear weapons program in the 1980s and 1990s. And there's some kind of a deal, some kind of a handshake, a gentleman's agreement, that if Saudi Arabia needed nuclear weapons, Pakistan would supply them. I haven't seen the details of this agreement, but when I talk to Pakistanis, they say, what agreement? Or if there was an agreement, that was yesterday. What has Saudi Arabia done for me today? They say they're not going to assist Saudi Arabia developing nuclear weapons. And they say this, and I believe them, because look at how Pakistan responded when Saudi Arabia said, please join us in attacking the Houthis in Yemen. Saudi Arabia asked Pakistan to supply troops and aircraft. The Pakistan parliament said, no way, unanimously, no, we're not going to do that. So if they won't supply aircraft, I don't think they're going to supply nuclear weapons. But what I worry about is retired Pakistani nuclear scientists being lured to help Saudi Arabia. We have to be careful about this. Our intelligence agencies have to be on the lookout. I talked to Pakistani government officials. They say they're not going to let it happen. They're going to pay Pakistan retired nuclear scientists, give them a job for the rest of their life so they don't need to go to Saudi Arabia. And so I asked, what are you going to pay them? And they won't tell me that. So I'm a little worried about Pakistani retired nuclear scientists. And I'm worried about North Korea. Now, fortunately, there's no trade between North Korea and Saudi Arabia. But North Korea would be willing to sell anything to anybody if they can make money. So intelligence agencies have to be very careful about what North Korea might be doing. Mr. Garcia, you asked about migration. It's outside my area of responsibility. My colleagues from Chatham House can talk about this a little more. But you asked the question, what is the United States doing? And I would say the United States is engaged in a diplomatic effort to bring peace to Syria. If Syria can be pacified, if the war in Syria can be stopped, this would eliminate the greatest incentive for migrants to go to Europe. So the United States is trying to address the causes of the migration by engaging in peace talks in Syria. The United States agreed that Iran could join the talks because Iran is one of the principal supporters of the Assad regime. The United States used to not want Iran to participate, but Obama made a compromise. I think Secretary of State John Kerry is trying very hard in these peace talks. I don't have any sense of optimism that they will work because the situation is so complex. But at least I give the United States credit for trying.
¿Alguna pregunta más?
Gracias. Es una doctor. Yasmina Álvarez, de la Facultad de Ciencias Políticas y Sociales, y retomando las reflexiones del doctor Benítez sobre la cumbre nuclear y los riesgos que hay de que estos grupos terroristas accedan a material nuclear, a mí me gustaría su opinión sobre esta posibilidad que realmente se está contemplando, pero no a artefactos y a devices nucleares tradicionales, sino a la posibilidad de que utilicen bombas sucias u otro tipo de tecnología no convencional para realizar algún acto terrorista. Porque estamos pensando en la lógica tradicional de controlar los misiles, de controlar la venta de materiales nucleares, pero ¿qué pasa con estas posibilidades y si la cumbre u los sistemas de inteligencia lo están considerando? Gracias.
¿Alguien más?
Hi, Doris Karen. I'm also a visitor from London. My question for you is, are there any contacts or engagement between Russia and North Korea for geopolitical reasons that might have to do with Russia being interested in developing a relationship with a state that it knows is a pariah state by the West, and therefore it could someday find it useful to its disposal to have a relationships and contacts whereby, as you've mentioned, most of the rest of the outside world has a lot of difficulty in knowing what's going on inside the country.
I would like to ask you a question. Is it possible?
You're the director.
I'll try to structure my question in English. What is it really behind the Daesh phenomenon? For me, it's kind of interesting to realize why is it that the Western states, beginning with the US, has been reacting in such delay against Daesh. This is something that we need to think about it. I have here many people, experts, telling the stories about the involvement of Saudi Arabia in quite dramatic scenarios, such as the one we have in Syria and the one we have in Pakistan. But it seems that nothing is happening to Saudi Arabia. And this is a paradox. Why is it that America is not really confronting the Saudi Arabia? I mean, I know that America has been trying to get rid of Bashar al-Assad, but I mean, it seems that Bashar al-Assad is not living, and it's hard for me to realize, to understand that America is not playing hard politics in that region, because of the dimension of the crisis, the humanitarian crisis in Europe, because of all this displacement of people. It's been taking already too long. And now you have this meeting in Washington, and my question is, I mean, what is the real, I mean, are we, the dangers the whole world is really confronting in terms of having all these nuclear weapons? Well, we don't know in how many countries and places in the world there are nuclear challenges. And one other question that I would like to raise is, what is the participation of the private sector in all these scenarios? I mean, are there private industries in the nuclear industry? I mean, I'm absolutely ignorant, but I would like to hear something in this regard, because we know that in the traditional guns industry, the private sector is there, and also in all these mercenary armies all over these conflict areas. So I would like to hear something in regard to what is the role of the private sector in the nuclear tensions we are beginning to face in the world.
It's good that we are nearing the end, because the questions are getting harder and harder. Let me just address the first and the very last one. At the Nuclear Security Summit that is beginning tomorrow, I don't know exactly the outcome. I don't have high expectations of something new. I think that they will be talking about the steps made to date. The countries that have been participating will reinforce their commitments. Mexico is one of them. I checked Mexico's record before I came down from Washington, and I saw that Mexico has a very good record of eliminating all highly enriched uranium. It's a highly enriched uranium-free country, so the possibility of terrorists obtaining the wherewithal for a nuclear weapon in Mexico is zero. But they could still obtain the radiological devices for dirty bombs. Now, when the Nuclear Security Summit started 8 years ago, they didn't talk about dirty bombs, but they added this to the agenda in 2014, because they realized that although dirty bombs are a much lower consequence, it doesn't kill too many people. It's nothing of the magnitude of a nuclear weapon, but it has a much more likelihood. It's a lower consequence but higher possibility, and they needed to address attention to it. And the terrorists who set off the bombs in Brussels last week, they wanted to obtain some material that they could have used for dirty bomb. Fortunately, they didn't get it. So it's good that countries devote attention to it. Now, nuclear industry is also devoting attention to it. In connection with the Nuclear Security Summit in Washington, there's a nuclear industry summit, and leaders from the nuclear industry around the world are meeting to talk about how they could contribute to securing nuclear material. So I think they are actually, I don't look upon nuclear industry as a potential source of malevolence, but rather they're trying to help to keep nuclear energy safe and secure. I'm personally not an advocate of nuclear energy. After the Japanese Fukushima disaster, even a country like Japan could have such a disaster. It could happen anywhere. Director Nunez, part of your question about why is the United States responding too late to Daesh, why didn't they put pressure on Saudi Arabia? I remember talking to friends in Saudi Arabia a few years ago when evidence came up about private individuals in Saudi Arabia and in Oman and the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, providing assistance to Daesh as it was emerging. And I would ask my Saudi friends, and they would deny it at all. U.S. Treasury was putting pressure on Saudi Arabia behind the scenes to try to stop the flow of such assistance. Some of what the United States does is late and clumsy and ineffective, but some of what they do is behind the scenes and it has some effect. But by the time they stopped the assistance from these private individuals, Daesh had other means of sustaining itself by selling oil and by engaging in criminal behavior that provided them with the wherewithal. But again, in this area, I'm not an expert. My colleague Doris Carrion is an expert, and maybe she can talk with you all later about this. I thank you very much. Nobody fell asleep, as far as I can tell. You're a very good audience. You asked good questions, and tough questions, and hard questions. And I appreciated learning from you as well. Thank you.
Felicidades, Raúl, muchísimas gracias y gracias también a todos ustedes. Hasta pronto.